This is Chapter 60 of Following the Equator. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Following the Equator by Mark Twain, Chapter 60. To Lahore, The Governor's Elephant, Taking a Ride, No Danger from Collision, Rawalpindi, Back to Delhi, An Orientalized Englishman, Monkeys and the Paint Pot, Monkey Crying Over My Notebook, Arrival at Jaipur, In Rajputana, Watching Servants, The Jaipur Hotel, Our Old and New Satan, Satan as a Liar, The Museum, A Street Show, Blocks of Houses, A Religious Procession. Satan, impatiently, to newcomer. The trouble with you Chicago people is that you think you are the best people down here, whereas you are merely the most numerous. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. We wandered contentedly around here and there in India, to Lahore, among other places, where the lieutenant governor lent me an elephant. This hospitality stands out in my experiences in a stately isolation. It was a fine elephant, affable, gentlemanly, educated, and I was not afraid of it. I even rode it with confidence through the crowded lanes of the native city, where it scared all the horses out of their senses, and where children were always just escaping its feet. It took the middle of the road in a fine, independent way, and left it to the world to get out of the way or take the consequences. I am used to being afraid of collisions when I ride or drive, but when one is on top of an elephant, that feeling is absent. I could have ridden in comfort through a regiment of runaway teams. I could easily learn to prefer an elephant to any other vehicle, partly because of that immunity from collisions, and partly because of the fine view one has from up there, and partly because of the dignity one feels in that high place, and partly because one can look in at the windows and see what is going on privately among the family. The Lahore horses were used to elephants, but they were rapturously afraid of them just the same. It seemed curious. Perhaps the better they know the elephant, the more they respect him in that peculiar way. In our own case, we are not afraid of dynamite till we get acquainted with it. We drifted as far as Rawalpindi, away up on the Afghan frontier. I think it was the Afghan frontier, but it may have been Herzegovina. It was around there somewhere, and down again to Delhi to see the ancient architectural wonders there and in Old Delhi and not describe them, and also to see the scene of the illustrious assault in the Mutiny days, when the British carried Delhi by storm, one of the marvels of history for impudent daring and immortal valor. We had a refreshing rest there in Delhi, in a great old mansion which possessed historical interest. It was built by a rich Englishman who had become Orientalized, so much so that he had a zenana. But he was a broad-minded man, and remained so. To please his harem he built a mosque. To please himself he built an English church. That kind of a man will arrive somewhere. In the Mutiny days the mansion was the British general's headquarters. It stands in a great garden, Oriental fashion, and about it are many noble trees. The trees harbor monkeys, and they are monkeys of a watchful and enterprising sort, and not much troubled with fear. They invade the house whenever they get a chance, and carry off everything they don't want. One morning the master of the house was in his bath, and the window was open. Near it stood a pot of yellow paint and a brush. Some monkeys appeared in the window. To scare them away the gentleman threw his sponge at them. They did not scare at all. They jumped into the room and threw yellow paint all over him from the brush, and drove him out. Then they painted the walls and the floor and the tank and the windows and the furniture yellow, and were in the dressing-room painting that when help arrived and routed them. Two of these creatures came into my room in the early morning, through a window whose shutters I had left open, and when I woke one of them was before the glass brushing his hair, and the other one had my notebook, and was reading a page of humorous notes and crying. I did not mind the one with the hairbrush, but the conduct of the other one hurt me. It hurts me yet. I threw something at him, and that was wrong, for my host had told me that the monkeys were best left alone. They threw everything at me that they could lift, and then went into the bathroom to get some more things, and I shut the door on them. At Jaipur, in Rajputana, we made a considerable stay. We were not in the native city, but several miles from it, in the small European official suburb. There were but few Europeans, only 14, but they were all kind and hospitable, and it amounted to being at home. In Jaipur we found again what we had found all about India, that while the Indian servant is in his way a very real treasure, he will sometimes bear watching, and the Englishman watches him. If he sends him on an errand, he wants more than the man's word for it that he did the errand. When fruit and vegetables were sent to us, a chit came with them, a receipt for us to sign; otherwise the things might not arrive. If a gentleman sent up his carriage, the chit stated "from such and such an hour to such and such an hour," which made it unhandy for the coachman and his 2 or 3 subordinates to put us off with a part of the allotted time and devote the rest of it to a lark of their own. We were pleasantly situated in a small 2-storied inn in an empty large compound which was surrounded by a mud wall as high as a man's head. The inn was kept by 9 Hindu brothers, its owners. They lived, with their families, in a 1-storied building within the compound, but off to one side, and there was always a long pile of their little comely brown children loosely stacked in its veranda, and a detachment of the parents wedged among them, smoking the hookah or the howdah, or whatever they call it. By the veranda stood a palm, and a monkey lived in it, and led a lonesome life, and always looked sad and weary, and the crows bothered him a good deal. The inn cow poked about the compound and emphasized the secluded and country air of the place, and there was a dog of no particular breed, who was always present in the compound, and always asleep, always stretched out, baking in the sun, and adding to the deep tranquillity and reposefulness of the place, when the crows were away on business. White draperied servants were coming and going all the time, but they seemed only spirits, for their feet were bare and made no sound. Down the lane a piece lived an elephant in the shade of a noble tree, and rocked, and reached about with his trunk, begging of his brown mistress or fumbling the children playing at his feet. And there were camels about, but they go on velvet feet, and were proper to the silence and serenity of the surroundings. The Satan mentioned at the head of this chapter was not our Satan, but the other one. Our Satan was lost to us. In these later days he had passed out of our life, lamented by me, and sincerely. I was missing him. I am missing him yet, after all these months. He was an astonishing creature to fly around and do things. He didn't always do them quite right, but he did them, and did them suddenly. There was no time wasted. You would say, "Pack the trunks and bags, Satan." "Where good?" "Very good." Then there would be a brief sound of thrashing and slashing and humming and buzzing, and a spectacle as of a whirlwind spinning gowns and jackets and coats and boots and things through the air, and then with a bow and touch, "All righty, master." It was wonderful. It made one dizzy. He crumpled dresses a good deal, and he had no particular plan about the work, at first, except to put each article into the trunk it didn't belong in. But he soon reformed in this matter. Not entirely, for to the last he would cram into the satchel sacred to literature any odds and ends of rubbish that he couldn't find a handy place for elsewhere. When threatened with death for this, it did not trouble him. He only looked pleasant, saluted with soldierly grace, said, "Where good?" and did it again next day. He was always busy, kept the rooms tidied up, the boots polished, the clothes brushed, the wash-basin full of clean water, my dress-clothes laid out and ready for the lecture-hall an hour ahead of time, and he dressed me from head to heel in spite of my determination to do it myself, according to my lifelong custom. He was a born boss, and loved to command, and to jaw and dispute with inferiors, and harry them and bullyrag them. He was fine at the railway station. Yes, he was at his finest there. He would shoulder and plunge and paw his violent way through the packed multitude of natives with 19 coolies at his tail, each bearing a trifle of luggage, one